So welcome to Kim Cathall, who is the Patient Safety Advisor in the Quality and Risk team. I work very closely with her on a number of things, and she's very, very experienced in this area. Human factors is something that we've known about for quite some time. Some industries are much further ahead than us, for example, the airline industry. But it really is something that is key to understanding the nature of risk and how we can reduce it. So without further ado, thank you very much, Kim. Over to you.
Okay, so I'm just going to start straight up, and then feel free to interject if you've got any questions, and there should be a little bit of time for questions at the end. This presentation is broken up into, it's got a couple of videos. It's actually got a third video, which I'm probably not going to play because I think you can, you've probably already done some of that stuff yourself, and you can head off and do it. So I shall head into here. You can see that. Can everyone see it? Thumbs up.
Yeah, we can see you in the presenter part of the thing, but it's fine.
Okay. Oh, that's not how it's showing here.
You got two screens. Okay. I think you must be sharing.
Oh, the wrong way around. Okay. Oh, that's a challenge. That would be a real challenge to change that one.
I think you're fine. Let's just go with this.
Okay, let's go. Okay, right. Okay, so the objectives today are to explain how human factors principles apply to healthcare. And as James has already alluded to, human factors is a science that's well known to other industries such as aviation. Describe how changes to processes can mitigate the effects of factors that contribute to error. Talk about the simplification, standardization, constraints, force functions, and redundancies. Discuss the risks and benefits of using technology to improve patient safety. So just as a bit of an outline, I'm going to talk a little bit about the science of human factors, the design principles to reduce human error, and the risks and rewards of technology. So first of all, why does it matter? Healthcare workers who don't understand the basics of human factors are like infection control professionals who don't understand microbiology, and that comes from the World Health Organization. And I think certainly from the work that we are doing in the adverse event space, which I picked up the responsibility of at the start of this year, we are seeing quite a big focus on some of the systems concepts of improvements, but not around appreciation of how the system influences the individual. So we need to be aware of common types of cognitive errors that can help clinicians recognize and avoid them. So I'm just going to play a little video. I found a couple of videos that I thought were really quite good at explaining some of the basics. So I'll start this one. Hopefully it's all going to work fine.
You'll need to make sure you're sharing your computer sound as well. Yeah,
sorry.
So if you go to the up arrow next to your mute button, there'll be an audio settings menu that you can, and you need to share the computer sound so that we can hear your
up arrow next to, so the down arrow next to the mute button.
Yeah, sorry, down or up,
Yep.
And then there's
so speakers, Synaptics HD audio, or same as system?
No, not those. So if you click on
sorry, this is my technology.
Yeah.
It says leave computer audio.
Okay, it might be already working. Let's try play the video and let's see if we can hear it.
Can you hear that?
No.
No.
Okay, so what I could probably
that's not going to work.
I'll play the video on my side, yeah.
Sorry, I do have limitations in technology, which James is sort of familiar with.
I will just get your presentation at 1 minute. Loading up your presentation, just a minute.
So I need to stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, if you just stop sharing for now, I
Yep,
will
there you
load
go.
up the first. Oh. So is the video on the picture, or is it on the?
It's on the link.
On the link, okay.
One of the great challenges in this work is knowing.
Sorry, and then you have the ads to contend with.
Yeah. Right, I will share my screen. Oh, I found where the setting is. Okay, right.
Enough about a subject.
Can you hear that? Yeah.
To think you're right.
So what are human factors? This short video for frontline staff will provide you with an overview of human factors and why they are relevant to us in healthcare. Have a think. Have you ever done something wrong because of bad design? For example, have you ever walked into a door thinking it was a push door when it turned out to be a pull door? What about this design? What are the odds of picking the wrong medication rather than the right medication based on the design of those ampules? These are just a few examples of the huge science that is human factors and ergonomics, and this video seeks to define the terms human factors and ergonomics, describe their role in healthcare, and hopefully by the end you'll appreciate their influence on your performance as an individual, as a team, and at the system level. Human factors is a science that provides an understanding of what affects our performance and behaviour in the workplace. It allows us to better understand how we work both mentally and physically, and how we can design our work environment and systems to maximise patient care, safety and staff well-being. Human beings are fantastic. Our brains are incredible at being able to make sense of complex situations and multitasking. We're constantly jumping from one task to an idea to an action to another. And you can understand why you feel so tired at the end of the shift when your mind is working like that, trying to juggle multiple tasks. But of course, that also means that sometimes we miss something, or we drop something. And what about when you're ill as well? We understand that our cognitive functions can be impaired, and when we are patients, we may need extra support for everyday decisions and tasks that we wouldn't normally need in day-to-day life. And what about the world around us? How does that influence us? Understanding our strengths and weaknesses as humans and how we receive and process information allows us to better design equipment, tools, software and physical environments for us and our patients. For example, when we read, our brain makes associations between the order of the letters in a word that we are familiar with and allows us to read it quicker because we don't read every single letter. You can read this on the screen easily. But what about these? How about now? Medication labels is a great example of human factors redesign that helps us address the risk of how humans process information with those tactfully placed capital letters. Human factors is user-centered. It is about understanding how we are affected by the tools, tasks and environment we work in and the culture of our teams and organisation, and then takes that understanding to make the situation better. It allows us to understand how complex healthcare is and how one part of healthcare, by changing it, can easily impact on another. We're going to look at three main components of human factors: us as individuals, teams, and then the wider system. So let's start with you.
As a human being, we have limitations. The problem is that when we reach our limits, if we overcome our limits, we're far more likely to commit an error or not identify when an error has occurred. A great way to think about this is to think that you have got 3 metaphorical buckets, and the fuller those buckets with stuff, the more likely you are to commit an error. One of your buckets is your self bucket. This bucket fills up depending on your expertise, how much skill you've got, how much knowledge you've got, and how much capacity you've got. Your second bucket is the context bucket. This fills up depending on the situation that you're working in, how much support you've got, what equipment you're using, and how is the environment around you designed. And then you have your task bucket. This relates to the particular task you're doing. Healthcare is very task focused and fills up depending on the type of task you're doing, how complex it is, how likely an error is to occur, how many steps it takes, and how new is it to you. You can think about this before you go into any situation. How full are your self, context, and task buckets? The fuller they are, the more likely you are to do something wrong or not spot a problem. This is the point where you should ask for help to minimise the chance of things going wrong. Make sure you recognise your limitations. And then what about teams? What makes an excellent and effective team? A good team has clear leadership, is aware of the situation that's going on, looks after its team members, and communicates clearly. Leadership means making sure the team is working towards a common goal, making sure that team processes are used, for example, briefings, huddles, and debriefings. A good leader also makes sure the team is on the same page by monitoring the situation, ensuring everybody is aware of everything that is going on. A good team looks after each other. That means identifying when your colleagues need help, but also accepting help when you need it. It also means speaking up should you see anything that concerns you related to safety or quality. And all of this requires communication. Communication is about saying what you mean and making sure what you mean is heard and is actually undertaken. This is called closed loop communication. And then finally we have the system. This is the wider world around you that is constantly changing, and you as a person have to constantly adapt to changes in the system. This is called resilience. We as individuals have resilience, we adapt to the world around us, but also the system that we work in adapts to the constant everyday changes. Look around you in your workplace. Who is there? What equipment are you having to work with? What protocols and policies are you following? What is the environment like? By identifying all of these different interactions allows us to identify where there are factors that might inhibit our performance, but also factors that might support our performance in practice. Remember, human factors is about performance and about supporting your performance in practice through an understanding and then a optimization of the world around us. There is loads of work streams related to human factors going on in the Trust. Speak to the patient safety team, speak to the Trent Simulation Centre, have a look at our NUH Teams programme, and please find out more about human factors and how they relate to you.
Thanks, James.
Okay.
Okay, so I think you'll agree with that video. You've seen some snippets, and quite obviously we have multiple challenges in our health environment. We work in an incredibly complex environment, and quite often when you're looking at things that go wrong, you're looking at normal human behaviour in an abnormal situation. So whilst we might work in a system and be quite familiar with it, we come up with workarounds, we come up with different ways of doing things. We can get quite creative because we think, you know, we can circumvent some of the systems that we do have, but understanding what goes wrong and why it goes wrong is really important. So this video did show that we really want to focus on performance and understand the context. So there we go. So there are 3 types of human errors, and basically it is the failure to carry out a planned action as intended. And so one can be where the action doesn't go as intended, or the second can be the action goes as intended but it's incorrect. So when it doesn't go as intended, we've got slips or lapses. So that can be, and certainly for me, medication error is one big thing that happens here. We're distracted, there's lots of things going on. We have patients wanting to go to the toilet. We have our colleagues, which is one of the biggest reasons that nurses make administration errors, is one of their colleagues is talking to them. And we have slips or lapses that lead to the error. The other thing is that we have mistakes, and these can be rule-based, so we either deviate from what we are supposed to do, or knowledge-based. We don't actually have the knowledge to undertake the task at hand. Along with that, you've got two types of mental processes. So you've got your automatic processes where we know how to do stuff. So we can do an ECG because we do it time and time again, and we know exactly what needs to happen. These are prone to errors of execution. So if I put one of my leads in the wrong place on this time because someone's talking to me and I'm distracted, the recording will look different. Then you've got your controlled sort of thinking. This is conscious, slow and deliberate. And it can be solving a problem. So, you know, how are we going to deal with the situation we've got in front of us? And they're prone to errors of planning. So it's just quite useful to understand the two types of mental processes that can lead to errors. With the cognitive errors, as we think, we have mental shortcuts that occur. So we try and simplify our thinking based on patterns and experiences. And sometimes we can assess the situation quickly but miss things. So for instance, what I've seen with the medication errors again is that people know what they need to do, but they take shortcuts because it takes too long, or they think they really have a good handle on it. And so, you know, and 9 times out of 10, it will work fine for them, but on occasion, it won't work fine. You've got a physician, for instance, that comes in and just says with a patient and assumes that it's another drunk, but we miss a hypoglycemia diagnosis. You've got the lookalike packaging, which showed in the video. So that's something that we don't have here, but it is something that I would be keen for this DHB to look at. And then alarms is something that's classic for me, who isn't in the clinical environment all the time. But what I do see is that we quite often have alarms going constantly, and I'm thinking about what's going on here, and the nurses are totally desensitized to that, just the environment that we work in. What factors make errors more likely to occur? Just think about the following scenarios. You've got the physician diagnosing a patient. There's a lot of information that feeds into that diagnosis. You've got a pharmacist filling in an order. So they generally like to know what the purpose of the medication is, you know, what the patient's medical history is, etc. So it's not just a matter of completing the task at hand. And then you've got the nurse delivering the treatment. So again, it's not just the task focused that can occur, it's about the contextual situation around it. And within each of those, you've got automatic and controlled thinking that needs to occur to get things right. So it's a highly complex environment. So what factors make errors more likely to occur? You've got internal factors, so how you're feeling on the day, whether you're hungry and you need to go to lunch, whether you can recall certain things. You've got external factors, so you've got the noise, the light, the temperature, work schedule, shift work particularly is a major challenge, distractions, and then you've got the language barriers. And then you've got cognitive bias, and so we can make assumptions. So you've got your patient who comes into hospital who is combative and difficult and is intoxicated, but you know, what else is actually going on here? Have they fallen and hit their head? Are they hypoxic? What's going on? We must never make an assumption that what they're presenting with is actually what's happening until we prove otherwise. The classic for me was the person who comes in with chest pain into the emergency department is always a heart attack until you prove it's not. And you prove it's not by getting the diagnostics done. And so I think we have a science that we work in, and it's really important that we follow that through and use it. So when we look at performance influencing factors, we've got all of these things, but what's the easiest to change and what's the most difficult to change. And when I look at things that go wrong, adverse events, and even your SAC 3 and 4s, so when harm is minimal or hasn't occurred, what quite often you will see is that people say, I'll tell the staff not to do that next time. I will write another policy. I will tell them to go and get some training. So they are the factors that we quite often put in to prevent these errors from occurring. But it's not actually evaluating the system and looking at what's going on around here. And one of the things that strikes me is the work that has happened in the last 5 years around releasing time to care is a lot of that stuff was focused on consistent ways of doing things, having the same thing in the same place so that staff knew where to find it, managing certain aspects the same way, so ward rounds, managing food and fluids exactly the same, having strategies in place. But we really struggle to find commitment to implement some of those things in clinical areas. So I think, you know, for me, there's potentially a lost opportunity to take up some of the stuff that could have affected this. That said, it's never too late. So we do have those opportunities. And if we want to look at change moving forward, James Reason talked about workplaces and organisations easier to manage than the minds of the individual workers. So that consistency is really important. The challenge for us that we have in clinical environments with highly skilled people is that they also say that I can use my, you know, personal judgment. I've got critical thinking. I've got huge skill and knowledge. So, you know, you do have a bit of a challenge in that space, and how we convince people that standardization is probably one of the most effective strategies that we have. So how can we prevent errors? Vigilance and hard work can be effective to a point, but nothing worse than someone who has made an error when their manager says, you know, don't do that next time, and you've got to work harder, or I want you to go and do another course, when you're already feeling overwhelmed and overloaded. But we don't, and so we can't sustain performance by trying harder. Human factors engineering strives to understand how people perform in different circumstances in order to build safer systems. And the principles come from anatomy, physiology, physics, and biomechanics. So one example of changing systems is over the past 20 years, patient deaths due to anaesthesia have declined from 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 200,000. And the key changes that have been made there have been standardising valves, different brands of machines used to clockwise and counterclockwise inconsistently, avoiding reliance on memory through checklists, and promoting teamwork by encouraging others to speak up. Strategies to prevent error are things like I talked about before with releasing time to care. We simplify, we standardise, we avoid reliance on memory, we improve access to information, we take advantage of habits and patterns, we use force functions and constraints, we use visual controls, promote effective team functioning, use redundancies, eliminate external factors that degrade performance, and create systems that are better able to tolerate errors. So here, thinking about the previous slide, what do we do to when we're double checking someone's work? Is that particularly helpful? I don't think so. A computer alerting someone of a potential error, removing a step in a process, storing things that are used together in the same place, and a system that requires a piece of information. So the previous slide had the strategies. What strategies can we put in place? So double checking someone's work. We're all health professionals. We all should be able to do the same thing, assuming we've had the skill and training. So that's redundant. We don't need to be doing that. A computer alerting someone of a potential error. We want systems that can tolerate errors. Removing a step in a process to simplify things. Storing things that need to be used together, take advantage of patterns so we get things habitual. and a system that requires a piece of information to save, that's a force function. So this is the only way I can do it. I can't do it any other way. So talking about technology, quite often it's seen as the pinnacle and the be all and end all, but certainly some of the stuff that I've looked at is you've got to make sure that your system is correct and people understand the system, because you cannot design something to eliminate error totally. So some of the things that have been looked at is barcoding around medication errors, etc. Computerized prescriber order entry systems. So we've got new pumps coming. Potentially though, I can still select the wrong thing, or I can have a slip of and still select the wrong patient for whatever reason. It's amazing when you start to look at some of these things, how people's workarounds can still lead to errors. So we've got to be really careful that our system is working in a methodical and standardized way. And of course, it doesn't overcome some of the human factors things, such as over-reliance on technology and alert fatigue. So as I've already said, best practice in order to be effective you should look at your design. And so you use your skills that you have in process mapping, so understand what currently happens, and then you start to look at what could happen in the future and how can technology help that and simplify and standardize. So you've got to understand your current state in your system. It should be tested at the coalface, so that's your PDSA. You want to be making sure that you've got the actual users testing it and making sure that they understand how something really works. Throw it into where people are creative and do try and come up with workarounds and see what you can come out with. Workarounds can lead to serious error, and it's very simple for them to become quite habitual quite quickly. And so if there are workarounds that are being identified, then that is not a well-structured system. And we shouldn't be overly reliant on our technology. We still should still perform the double checks when it's reasonable, such as some medications still do need a double check. The question is, do they need the double check to the bedside, is what we're looking at the moment. So there's a whole lot of stuff that you need to be thinking about in that space. So I suppose not necessarily now, but take it away and think about in your area, one area where you could look at making a change based on human factors design. Think about what it might look like. Are you looking at simplification, standardization, constraints, force function, or redundancy? Some of the things that I know people that have been involved in improvement for a long time, one of the first questions, that you can ask, particularly if you've got someone coming into an area that's not familiar with, is, why do you do it that way? Or we've always done it that way. Or why do you keep that amount of paper when it's all on the computer? Well, we always have. So it's quite good just to ask some of those basic questions at the outset. This is another video, but I'm not going to show this one because there's 3 videos in this presentation, and I have chosen to show 2. But you can access it yourselves, and I'm sure you've already seen it. It really talks about the testing, and I have already alluded to that. So the importance of, once you've designed what you think will work, is getting in there and testing with the system. And that is looking at your work as imagined. So that's your process design, how you think it might work. Looking at work as disclosed, and this is something that we quite often miss. So this is what staff say they do, and then work is done, what they actually do. So I think it's really important to look at those 3 steps, because quite often what people say they do and then you observe them is not what they actually do. And so for me, there's that jump from safety 1, which is really a focus on the individuals made the errors, how can we fix the individuals? That's the old thinking, to safety 2, which is happening at the HQSC from the Adverse Event Learning Program, is looking at safety 2, which really does focus on what's happening in the system? How do we support individuals to manage in a highly complex situation? What are the ergonomics we need to be thinking about? And how do we really move forward and get learning out of our reviews and how our system is actually functioning? And so I'm just going to leave you with one more video that I'll hand over. I'll stop sharing and hand it over to. And think about any questions that you might have.
Yep. So shall we take questions after the video?
Yep.
Okay then, right, I'll load up the video. Cool. This is the one, Human Factors, a quick guide. This is an ad showing at the moment.
Yep, that's right.
Can you hear that? Yep.
Human Factors is about making it easier to do the right thing. If we make it easier to do the right thing, it also becomes harder for us to do the wrong thing.
I'm sure you have heard the phrase, to err is human. Human error is human nature.
We make little mistakes all the time, just because we are human. At home, they do not often have significant consequences. For instance, you forget to pick up your keys, or you pick up the wrong item in the supermarket because the packaging looks similar.
If you have ever tried to make a cup of tea or coffee in someone else's kitchen, you will understand how being unfamiliar with where things are stored can affect our ability to do a job quickly and easily.
Making a hot drink becomes harder, not because you don't know how to make a drink, but because the layout of the room means you can't find things easily. These same principles apply when we try and do something for our patients.
If you have ever wondered how we can try and prevent things like this happening, then the science of human factors can provide the answers. It can explain why we make mistakes and how we can design the workplace to make it easier to do our jobs.
Human Factors describes how we interact with everything in the workplace, the physical environment, with equipment, and with the processes of care that set out how we are supposed to do things at work. Our ability to perform at our best is also affected if we feel tired and hungry.
The culture of the organisation is also important, as this affects how everybody behaves and what happens when a mistake occurs.
Everyone makes trade-offs when faced with the choice of doing something according to the policy as opposed to just getting it done. This is especially the case if work is very busy, there are time pressures, and the system isn't designed to make it easy to do the right thing.
For instance, a patient may be unwell, and the policy says they should have their observations done every hour. However, there are a lot of unwell patients on the ward. All the monitors that the nurse is used to using are currently being used on other patients.
There is another monitor available, but because this is different to the rest, the nurse is unsure how to use it correctly. Rather than try to use a piece of equipment that she is not familiar with, she waits until a different monitor becomes free. In the meantime, the patient deteriorates, and this goes unnoticed.
In this situation, the nurse knew that the patient needed frequent monitoring and observations, but did not provide them. The reason she did not provide them was not because she didn't know what to do, but because the equipment she was asked to use was different to all other equipment. This is an example of where having standardized equipment would have made it easier to do the right thing.
The science of human factors can also help us investigate the way we work, find out why errors occurred, and help design better ways of working.
The aim is not to be critical, but to gain a better understanding of exactly what makes their life difficult and what makes their life easy.
Human factors awareness helps us prevent errors and helps us understand why mistakes occurred. This doesn't just mean when things go wrong, but also near misses as well. However, it only helps us if we are really honest in our investigations and acknowledge the real reasons why things go wrong.
In doing this, we need to look beyond what happened when things go wrong. We need to go all the way back through the system and look at decisions made across the organisation that contributed to the error. This may include decisions made about planning and procurement of equipment.
When investigating errors, human factors can help provide a better explanation of why the error occurred. In the example of the nurse and the monitors, it would be inappropriate to just blame the nurse, because part of the cause of the error was down to equipment design and lack of standardization across the organisation.
We can't do this on our own. It is important that we all play a part in this, all the way from the ward, to the managers, to the hospital board. The more people that understand why human factors is important, the better care we can provide.
The willingness of an organisation to recognise and act on these sorts of contributory problems is a good marker of the organisation's approach to improving safety and quality of care.
Ideally, organisations should have an open and fair culture that encourages reporting of incidents so that everyone can learn from mistakes and near misses.
We can also learn how to improve care by looking at areas where things work well. These areas have often found solutions to problems and already worked out how to do things better.
It is this organisational culture that has an impact on how we treat our colleagues and what happens to staff when mistakes and errors do occur.
If we do this, then we can design the workplace so it is easier to do the right thing. This makes our jobs easier and reduces the chance of mistakes occurring and causing harm to patients.
Applying a human factors approach to the delivery of healthcare makes it easier to do the right thing and can improve the quality of care that patients receive.
Thank you. So that's really all I have. As you can see, we are really exploring the human factors sort of side of things from the adverse event learning program. We really want to be changing the focus of how we undertake our adverse event reviews, particularly the more serious ones. If I think about some of the stuff in the last couple of weeks that's happened from a DHB perspective, those of you that have been on and heard the CE talking about the Southland site, for instance, and the challenges that we have in Southland around managing the ED, managing infection control processes, how they managed the boat with the affected COVID people. And it made it really difficult for people to do the right thing because of decisions made 15 years ago when the facility was built, where they had anti-rooms, they had more space for this sort of thing, and it was all taken out to save money. So it's a really interesting sort of environment that we work in. It's a very expensive environment, but we take our shortcuts to save money, but in fact it makes it more difficult for staff to do the right thing, and then they become creative in how they do things moving forward. So I think that's why it's really important for us, for staff at the coalface, for people in the background, and also right through to the board, as the video says, to be ensuring that your system design really looks at improvement across the board and involving people at all levels. So not sure if there's any questions.
You can use the chat, or Jenny Sawyers just put something. Could you please expand on the concept of redundancy?
Yep. So the redundancy is the concept where we have historically printed off. So back some time ago in ED days, when I worked in ED, we used to print off all of the lab results, and that's the way we did things. And then everything became electronic, the results were readily available, etc. There was some thinking that everything should be in the clinical record because we looked at a singular hard copy file. But over time, what became more obvious is that people actually use the electronic system. And so it became redundant to do that. It was wasting clinical staff time in ED, and it was wasting filing staff and clinical records time to be doing that. So it becomes a redundant process. And that's something that we should be looking at on a more regular basis. Are we doing this because we should and it's best practice, or are we doing it because we've always done it that way?
Yeah. So in a patient safety point of view, sometimes the redundancy improves safety because there's less chance of both people making a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if one person makes a mistake, the checker is unlikely to make the same mistake unless there is a systematic error causing both of them to make a mistake. So
That's right.
when you're checking controlled drugs, for example, with 2 people, it's more likely that the counting will be correct, etc. Yeah.
Correct.
Any other questions from the group, either on the chat or if you want to unmute yourselves? I've just got one question while people might be thinking of their own. Can you think of any really good examples of patient safety work that the DHB has done to really, you know, address safety at a systems level rather than just what, you know, the other example of just telling people to do better?
Well, I can actually. It's, for me, the deteriorating patient program is a classic. So we've got a standardized observation chart that staff coming to our DHB are familiar with. We've got principles in our escalation pathway. So the yellow zone is nurses, you know, respond to. The orange zone is house officers, red zone is registrar, and blue zone is, you know, let's get some help, and SMO level. So we have implemented a system or a chart, and the challenge that we now have is to look at how our system is responding to that and what's happening. So where they talk in both of the videos about the organisation and the culture, that's some of the stuff that we now need to start looking at, is how it works in reality. The chart is blamed sometimes for not working. Mostly when investigations are done, it's actually cultural stuff around what hasn't happened or reasons why. So that would be the standout for me, the most recent thing. Yep.
Great. Well, it looks like there's no other questions, so I'll just close this and say thank you very much, Kim, for giving us your expertise and experience on human factors. And those videos I've not seen before myself, and they're really actually quite good way to sum up the whole thing. So thank you very much, and thank you very much everybody else for coming.
Thank you.
And see you next month.
Thanks, James.
Cheerio.
See ya.
Bye.